it is all over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, yeah, thank you everybody for coming to the final session. I can't believe that we sort of started with accounting and we're closing with accounting related relating debate. But I thank you very much to our speakers who have all arrived, so I can be a bit calmer. We're going to this session is part of the Accounting for Purpose. We looked at the financial reporting on Thursday, and this session is looking at how do we capture impact. Thinking about Freya's presentation, yeah, how do we capture that? How do we capture that which is beyond the outputs of the organisation, the the change that happens in the wider society. So we've got three people from quite different backgrounds to talk to us. We've got Dr. Daphne Rixon, the Executive Director of the Centre of Excellence in Accounting and Reporting for Co-ops, and she's going to talk about another of CEOC's programmes. This one is developing cooperative indicators to work with the United Nations SDGs. And then we have Will Barr, who is here, I saw him, hello Will, who is the Head of Business Intelligence at Greenwich Leisure Limited, which is, it's the same sort of thing as, I have to write this one down, Cartrefi in Wales. It's a
charitable cooperative.
Sorry?
A charitable cooperative.
Yeah, a charitable cooperative. That's right. But they span out of Greenwich Leisure quite a while ago. Now, actually, I can't remember exactly when. But I became very interested in them because I used to live in Hackney in East London, and I used to, 35 years ago this is, I used to go swimming in some very decrepit swimming pools, beautiful, beautiful, Victorian buildings that were falling into disrepair. And I had actually in my back garden, practically, I had London Fields Lido, which was the most wonderful swimming pool, falling apart. And they closed. Armanga Road Baths, London Fields Lido, they closed. And about 15 years later, they closed, and Hackney Council said, that's impossible, we can't possibly run these anymore, they're far too expensive. And about 15 years later, they revived. They were refurbished and they were quite glorious, but very, very accessible. So it was like having a David Lloyd on your doorstep, but actually everybody could use it because it really was sort of community embracing. So I investigated the people who had galvanized Hackney into doing this, and it was Greenwich Leisure, and I love them, basically. I think they're pretty wonderful. So Will is going to talk to us about a social value calculator that GLL has developed, actually with Sheffield Hallam University. And we also have Richard Spencer from the Institute of Chartered Accountants. Again, he's the head of thought leadership at the Institute, and he's going to talk about how the Institute is trying to get organisations on board with the SDGs. So it's the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So it's sort of looking at organisations and seeing how we can bring the environment in as well as the social.
Please.
So can I ask Daphne to kick off? Is that all right? I'll mute myself.
Yes. Yes, I will share my screen. I guess you handed me host. I don't know if you can see my screen or not. Great. Okay. So as Maureen mentioned, I'm with the Centre of Excellence in Accounting and Reporting for Cooperatives at St. Mary's University, located in beautiful Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. Yes.
Sorry, Daphne, I can't see your screen. Ah, that's it. Great. Sorry, it's there.
Yeah. So in addition to running the Center of Excellence in Accounting and Reporting for Co-ops, which has been on the go, it was for a number of years. It was formed in 2007. And we do basically research on any aspect of both financial and non-financial reporting for cooperatives. And we've also taken a leadership role in developing SORP, Statements of Recommended Practice. We've got 6 of those developed, and as you recall from yesterday's meeting, we're about to embark on the 7th. So this presentation today is focused on another project that we're working on, and I'll just put this to full screen. So we're looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and certainly, as everyone is aware, 193 countries, including Canada, signed on to the 2030 agenda, and all signed on to that in 2015. So since then, there's certainly been a lot of interest in how to measure and report on the SDGs. And it's interesting to know that PricewaterhouseCoopers did a study and of 729 publicly listed companies from 6 countries, and they found that while 72% mentioned SDGs in their annual report, only 23 actually had any meaningful quantitative key performance indicators. And of course, in the Canadian environment, we really don't have at the moment for this sector, we don't have any way to measure and report on the cooperatives' performance with respect to the SDGs. So for this project, we partnered with Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, which is like an industry association representing co-ops and mutuals all across Canada. And of course, we're the academic partner at the Center of Excellence. And in terms of funding, we don't have a lot of money, so it's a shoestring budget, as most of us are used to, I guess. So we do have funding from the Canadian federal government funding agency that funds academic research through all the universities in Canada. We have a grant from them. And of course, the Center of Excellence is also supporting the project. In terms of who's working on it, well, in addition to myself, we have Dr. Fiona Dogood, and which is a wonderful name, I think. She's an adjunct professor at St. Mary's University. She teaches in our Masters of Management for Cooperatives and Credit Unions, and I teach in that program as well. And she's also our CARC Research Fellow, and she's been involved in doing co-op related research. She works as an independent consultant, but she does a lot of research. All of her research really is focused on cooperatives. She's done a lot of national and international studies. We're also fortunate to have José Charbonneau from University of Sherbrooke in Quebec, Canada. And she has, you know, in-depth quantitative abilities and an in-depth knowledge of cooperatives. And then rounding out our little foursome is Eric Goslin, and he's a recent graduate from our master's program at St. Mary's University. So the 4 of us have been beavering away at this for the past year and a bit. So the primary goal of the research is certainly, of course, to identify SDGs that are applicable for cooperatives. We want to have an online repository for the data, and eventually we want to create a benchmark. And we want to be able to use this information to say to the rest of the business world in Canada and elsewhere, this is what the cooperative sector is doing on SDG. So we'll have something tangible and quantitative that we can point to say, you know, X number are measuring along, you know, a certain number of the SDGs. And the secondary goal of the project is to help the Apex cooperative organizations, Cooperatives Mutual Canada, to give them more knowledge and capacity and help them as a national organization to promote SDGs with the cooperatives. There's, as everyone is aware, I'm sure, there's a huge amount of literature on SDGs. I'm just going to highlight a couple here that we will draw on in terms of our, our research project. Certainly the SDGs are intended to relate to poverty, inequality, the climate, environmental prosperity, peace and justice. Those are some of the main challenges that the SDGs are intended to address. Also, one of the goals of the SDGs is sustainable development for all nations that adhere to economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. So SDGs really focus on sustainable development in both developed and developing countries. And the idea is that they should be able to facilitate action at all levels, including government, civil society, private sector, science community, etc. So of course, in order to monitor progress towards SDGs, it's really important, of course, that you have a way to have some indicators to help you monitor that progress. And an indicator framework will help turn those SDGs into a management tool that would help countries develop their implementation strategies, to allocate their resources accordingly, and of course to have a report card. You got to have a way to measure this stuff so you can actually talk about it. You need to have that data behind it. And of course, it's important to establish accountability for all the stakeholders involved in this to achieve their SDGs. So the methodology that we adopted for this project is the participatory action research approach. So with participatory action, it's defined as an applied research approach in which the participants, so those who have a stake in the outcomes, take on an active researcher role. And that's what we're asking the industry association and the cooperatives in our pilot project to do. So in terms of the main theoretical backdrop, it will of course be the SDG framework itself. And when we started the project, participant recruitment was primarily the responsibility of the industry association. They, there's over 8,000 cooperatives in Canada, so they have the stretch to be able to get out there and find participants for us. And we were looking for a small number of participants because where it's a pilot project, it'd be a bit unwieldy if you had a large group. But we wanted to have cooperatives and credit unions representing small, medium, and large sizes and in various industries. And we wanted good geographical representation as well. So we did actually manage to recruit 16 that met that criteria. So the next step in our methodology, we've conducted 2 webinars. Our first webinar was more of a recruitment to sell them on the idea of the project. And then the second webinar was to explain the detailed steps of the project to those who decided to sign on. So then the first thing we did an online survey to assess the baseline knowledge of our participants with respect to the SDGs, just to get a baseline assessment of their knowledge level and what they're currently doing. We also introduced an online discussion board using Slack, and there was limited participation in that. It turns out the participants prefer webinars to the online discussion board. And I guess we introduced it probably at a time when it was to our disadvantage in that people, the virus had just started and people started working from home. And I think one more new thing to learn was probably too much. So, because not a lot of practitioners would have been familiar with online discussion boards and Slack. So we're more or less shelving it. It's still there if people want to have a discussion, but we're not actively promoting that part of the project. So I'll say a little bit later about their baseline knowledge, but what we found is they don't have in-depth knowledge of SDGs. It's more of a high-level general knowledge. So we decided to, rather than ask them what they would want and how they would want to measure their performance against the SDGs, we decided to provide some metrics for them to choose from. So what we did was we started with this comprehensive, massive spreadsheet, and we start off with, there's about 400 metrics in it, 151 of which are unique. So we started with a table in a paper done by Sonia Nokovic, and we started with her table. Then what we did was we took all those indicators and we assigned them to one or more SDGs. Then we took the same indicators and assigned them, where applicable, to the 7 principles of cooperatives. So I mentioned there was 400 metrics, of which 151 were unique. So how that happened was you could have a situation where you might have, say, one indicator that might apply to maybe 3 SDGs and 2 co-op principles. So that's how you're getting to that funny number. So in addition to the work by Dr. Sonia Nokovic, we also added more metrics from other sources, such as CEO Water Mandate, CDP, GRI, ISO, and we also took them from another tool that we have been working on. So, excuse me. So back about 4 or 5 years ago, we started working on a project called Cooperative Performance Indicators. And with that project, we were aiming to help the cooperatives measure along the 7 principles. So there's some data from that we've introduced into this project as well. So now that we had this massive these indicators in there, we have to try to find a way to pare this down to something more realistic. So first we ran a frequency analysis to rank the metrics from most frequent to less frequent. Then we identified 4 criteria to help us rank them. So we looked at what we thought were the importance to stakeholders, how feasible was it going to be for them to gather this data. We looked at relativity, so did you need to calculate one metric in order to get another one? And we looked at whether or not they were sector specific or could apply across a broad range of sectors. So I'm going to jump back now to the findings from our baseline surveys. So in terms of the level of awareness, basically this is a sliding scale here. So the red says I've read the SDGs. So they basically read about them. The purple, I've done a research on them. The blue, I've participated in committees, etc. So there's more of a high level rather than detailed knowledge of the SDGs, which is not surprising. I mean, these are practitioners who have busy jobs and, you know, responsible for a wide array of responsibilities in their organization. So it's pretty much as expected there. We asked them as well to rank the top 3 SDGs that they feel are most relevant to the global cooperative movement. So they, in order of importance, they ranked reduced inequalities, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, and SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. Here in this question, we were looking to see if their organizations were doing anything towards SDGs. So we had 31% were doing a lot, 21% nothing really, but we'd like to, and 47% not much, just a few things. The 4th question we asked was, is your organization already collecting data that shows impact towards the SDGs? And here you'll see the little the red one here, 5% says lots. And then you have the purple, somewhat, and the here 31% very little, the green, not at all, and then 10% don't know. So not really a lot happening in terms of, collecting the data that would show impact. And so some general findings from the survey. We also had some open-ended questions, etc. So we found that 2/3 of the cooperatives are not really doing much, but they'd like to. Some cooperatives are doing SDG type measurement, but probably not using the language of SDGs. And we found 1/4 of the participating cooperatives are collecting some SDG-like data. So when asked why they're interested in participating in this project, these are some of the responses: to create awareness and learn more about it, to align their organizations and members in a way to help move towards these goals, to learn about practical approaches, to measure and improve performance, and to learn how SDGs can have an impact on their communities and their members. So those are our main findings. Our next step, so we're still ranking, and it's a very, very tedious, time-consuming project, but we're almost there. So we want to get this list narrowed down to about 30 to 40 unique indicators that will serve several of the SDGs and the cooperative principles. So, yes.
Daphne, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to wind up because we started a little bit late and I've got to get everybody else in.
Okay, this is almost my last slide.
Great. Of course, it probably was. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go out to the participants first through an online survey to get them to identify of our narrowed down list, which ones they prefer, if they have the data, and if they don't have the data, would they be willing to collect it? And then we're going to summarize all of this, send it out to the participants. Then we'll have a webinar to discuss the findings, then eventually collect whatever data they do have and input it on a web tool that we already have developed. So I'll just skip through some of this. I guess the bottom 2 points. So to develop a benchmark, we're obviously going to have a critical number of cooperatives putting their data in, but I think it'd be very interesting when you get enough of cooperatives inputting their data. It'll help others evaluate how well they're doing compared to their peers. And we figure that even those who are not currently collecting the data, that it could be a bit of a nudge for them to start collecting it. It's something probably they just haven't thought of. And with this final one, I'll end. Just want to mention that next edition of our journal, the International Journal of Cooperative Accounting and Management, we have a special edition coming out in a couple of weeks. And we've got 7 papers, great papers in there focused on SDGs and cooperatives. So that'll be there for your reading enjoyment. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Daphne. Well, without further ado, I'd like to move on to ask Will to speak about Greenwich Leisure and their social value calculator, which is probably actually looking at SDGs, but without calling them SDGs. So, thanks, Will.
Thank you, Maureen.
And Rory, can you give Will? Can you make him co-host so he can share? Thank you.
So thank you for the lovely introduction, Maureen. And it's a great pleasure to join you all today in the area of social value impact. So just a little bit of background about GLL. I mean, Maureen's already touched on some of this, but GLL was formed in 1993, so we've been going quite a while. And not surprisingly, we started in the Royal Borough of Greenwich, hence the name Greenwich Leisure Limited. But during that journey between 93 and now, we've grown massively, to be honest. So now we still operate predominantly in London, but we now have a much wider reach across the UK. So we operate in Northern Ireland, we operate in Wales, and we operate in Cornwall. I mean, I guess we're the largest leisure charitable social enterprise in the UK. And our mission is kind of really to make public leisure centres, libraries and children's centres available and accessible to the whole community.
Can I just interrupt you a second? That your voice is breaking up. I don't know if it's the same for other people, but you might help the audio quality if you turn your video off. And given we've got your slides on, that's probably okay for now. Is that
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that. So I'll try again. Yeah. So really, our mission is about making our leisure centres, libraries, and children's centres available to the whole community, with a main aim to make a positive impact on health and well-being through physical exercise. And we're really keen on social change, and it's evident in some of the work that we've been doing. So certainly in terms of we like to employ locally where we can. We also have a very successful sports foundation that supports local athletes, and several of our local athletes that we've supported have gone on to be very successful at Commonwealth and Olympic Games. We're also involved in crowdfunding programs, and social value impact is key to GLL really, and it links nicely to our 4 pillars, which are essentially to deliver better service through better people to better communities, with better business at the heart of the organisation. In terms of social value and GLL's background, I mean, there's quite a lot of academic research out there, surprisingly, with generating social benefits to society. And the relationship between sport, physical activity, and 4 categories of social value impact can now be reliably evidenced through pioneering work done by Sheffield, Hallam, and others. And those 4 key areas are listed as improved health, which is no real surprise through physical activity, improved life satisfaction or social well-being, increased educational attainment, and reduced crime. And for us now, these impacts can be measured in monetary terms using the latest research from Sheffield Hallam, as I've just mentioned, and via what's known as the Data Hub Social Value Calculator, or what we call as the SVC. As a charitable social enterprise, GLL social value impact's just as important to us as our annual turnover. Obviously, one of our aims is where we generate any surplus is that needs to be reinvested back into the local communities. So the social value impact piece is really important to us. We work closely with our local authority partners and public health clients. And interesting to note Daphne's point about the high importance of reduced inequalities. This is very much evident in the work that we're doing around social value impact. And particularly in some of the more deprived areas where we're working in some of the London boroughs, it's very much about getting to what we would call the hard to reach groups. So people living in deprived areas, people who wouldn't necessarily be typical users of leisure centres. So for example, over 60s, Black and ethnic minorities, more female participation, trying to attract more usage and visits from children. So these groups are very much at the heart of the work that we're doing around social value impact. And the nice thing is, through the use of the social value calculator, which I'll come on to in a second, we're able to monetize the value of these collective impacts and interventions. So if we put on a specific activity or scheme, we can now measure the success and the impact of that scheme through the use of the social value calculator. So it's not only is this what I would call a measurement tool for us as an organization to demonstrate our social value impact, but it's very much a hands-on tool for the leisure centre staff to use and target those hard to reach groups within the local communities. And ultimately, this is about health and happiness and education and employment. So the social value calculator has been developed by an organization called For Global, who effectively their background is the running of feasibility studies into the running of major sporting events. But they, through working with Sheffield Hallam University and Experian, developed the social value calculator. And this came off the back of some research that Sheffield Hallam had done in 2016 to look at the social value impact in sport. And from that was born some funding through Sport England to look at developing a measurement tool that our sector could use to capture the impacts of the work that the staff, the community staff, are doing on the ground. The data hub is I guess is what you would call it's a kind of sport and leisure repository that has a suite of different business intelligence and marketing and sector benchmarking modules. And the social value calculator is one of those data hub modules. And for those of you that are interested in this, you can go to datahubclub.com and have a look at this. There's some quite interesting work going on around the benchmarking of our sector and some of the really high level business intelligence and marketing intelligence modules that are available. So how does the social value calculator work? So essentially we have a leisure management software system that captures all of the usages and attendances of our customers. And we're very fortunate that through work done by myself and the head of IT that we have one very big massive consolidated member database, and that makes partnering with something like the social value calculator a little bit easier because effectively we've got one data feed, and the idea is that we're taking customer usage data. So if you think about all of the activity transactions that are happening every hour and every day on our system, we're capturing that along with our customers' demographics, so we know who is attending those activities. So we're capturing age, ethnicity, and gender demographics. And the idea with the social value impact modeling is that the more often that you attend, the greater the social value impact. So you'll see on the module here on the screen I've got here, you've got 3 different types of frequency of usage. What we call core usage, which effectively is what we're saying is, if you're attending 4 times a month for pretty much most of the year, you're going to generate a significant amount of social value impact. Casual, less so, and then infrequent, we're effectively saying for about 1/3 of the year, you're attending 4 times per month. Where Experian come in is that the model looks at, for those of you familiar with the mosaic profiling, socio-demographic classification, the mosaic profile picks up the customer's postcode and then effectively partitions it into what we would either call upmarket, mid-market, or down-market. And then it looks, and then the model then takes age into account. So it says, is the attendance done by an old person, a young person, or is the data missing? Is it not available? And then it looks at the gender focus as well. So in particular, some particular areas where we need a male and female bias. So the idea is that if you're living in a deprived area, say, and you're over 60 and you're attending quite regularly, the idea is that you're more likely to generate more social value impact than, say, someone who's in their 20s, who's really healthy, who would be doing exercise anyway. So this talks back to that, being able to target those inequalities. And in terms of those 4 measures, which I mentioned earlier around health, crime, education, and well-being, you can see that on the left that they're kind of broken down as well. So we can also report on specific areas, such as breast cancer, colon cancer, coronary heart disease, etc. And the idea is that when all of this is fed into the social value calculator, and this happens on a daily basis, each month we can track the impact that we're making as an organization. So it's a great tool for the centre staff for encouraging their members and customers to use the facilities more often. The tool also comes with a wonderful mapping interface, which allows us to see geographically where those areas are based on ward and low super output area, where we're making the most social value impact. So again, we can see on the map whether we're hitting those hard to reach areas or those more deprived areas within our boroughs. I mean, the work that we've been doing on this, we were kind of first to market, I suppose, on this in our sector in 2016. And it's gone down really, really well, because the other thing is it's got a good evidence base behind it, and we're not trying to overclaim on stuff that we can't evidence. So if you like, although it's quite a narrow it's quite a narrow area, there is evidence behind all of these measures. So there's some kind of gravitas behind this model. And it's been really well received within our sector. I mean, we're very fortunate in 2017 and 2018 to win a UK Business Award for pioneering work in social value impact, and team of the year at Kensington Leisure Centre to look at their recovery post the Grenfell tragedy, because the Leisure Centre in Kensington is located right next to the Grenfell block, and it was used very much as a kind of hub centre to kind of regenerate the local community post the fire tragedy. So we're really proud of these awards, and we like to try and demonstrate our social value impact each year through a kind of corporate infographic. So this just gives you some ideas of you know, how we've developed this in the last year. So, you know, between 2018 and 2019, we increased our social value impact across the organisation. We're pretty much generating £2 for every pound spent, which is fantastic. And we're generating around £430 of social value for each customer that attends our leisure centres. I think the key thing with this is, you know, being able to measure change year on year is really important for us, because the question that I often get asked is, well, what if someone else was operating in the areas that you were operating? What difference is GLL making? What's nice about being able to measure this almost in a live environment is that we can see the progress that the organisation's made, not only on a month-on-month basis or a quarter-on-quarter, but also a year-on-year basis. And that's it from me.
Well, thank you very much. Well, one thing that I really like is that you've won the business awards against non-co-ops, and I think it really matters. I think it really matters that co-ops show themselves in the mainstream as better than their competitors, maybe. But perhaps,
yeah, thank you.
Thanks. So perhaps we could move on to Richard. I'm sorry, we're running a little bit behind time, but we will still have time for discussions, and I'll make a list of questions and put them to people. So Rory, if you could transfer to Richard so he can share screen if he needs.
I don't need to share a screen.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go slideless. But yeah, Maureen, I absolutely agree with you on the last one. What comes through and what's so great is just how these organisations and cooperatives are delivering on social expectations. You know, so as society's expectations grow, that businesses should be delivering public goods and accepting that a profit model might be the way of delivering some of those goods. The relevance of what we've all been discussing in the last 3 days is so important. So I was going to talk a bit about the Sustainable Development Goals and how we at the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales have looked at them. And I think the first thing I think is so important about the goals is that for the first time, from the sustainability or the sustainability point of view, we've got a definition of success. Because for so long, in my experience of being in this sector, we've been rather like an overbearing parent, kind of sort of saying, don't touch that and don't do that and stop doing that and you've made a mess there. And I think the great thing about the goals is that they give us a vision of success and an invitation to join the journey. And I think that's helped change the tone of the conversation. So it hasn't been one where you're just constantly telling people off. You're actually sort of saying, here is a vision of the world that the world wants, and what is your role in that? And it's also a definition of the common good, I think. So we in the Institute have used it to illuminate our public interest role. And I always have a real challenge with the idea of a public interest role, because it's kind of very patrician. You know, we've got Queen Victoria handing down to the professions a public interest role to look after the poor people. And I think in this day and age, we kind of think, well, who gave you that mandate? You know, we didn't ask you to have a public interest role for us. And I much prefer the idea of the common good and actually acting in the common interest, because that's about all of us, not some kind of piece in which we're helping somebody else. You know, it's that kind of piece of, if you've come here to help, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your freedom is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I think the idea of the common good and the common interest works much better. And I think the goals are a definition of the common interest. This was the biggest consultation the UN has ever done, and every single nation signed up to it. And you know, being the eternal optimist, it's absolutely sort of one of my touchstones. And so, of course, it speaks to our purpose, why we are here as a profession, and forces us to say what is our role within that. And I think I talked about the role of the profession on Thursday, and saying that it's about not creating interpretations of the world that create path dependencies to a better tomorrow, if you like. But it also speaks to our vision of a world of strong economies, and we've used it to illuminate that vision of talking about prosperous and resilient economies. And we have deliberately left out the word growth, based on fair and just societies, delivered within what nature can afford, and underpinned by good governance and partnerships. And the Sustainable Development Goals are now absolutely at the heart of our strategy. They are one of our key strategic goals. And as part of that, starting on our journey, the thing with the goals is where do you begin? And this is, I'll come to this later, but I think you just turn that cherry picking accusation on its head and see the goals that you pick as your point of entry into a system of sustainability. So our point of entry has been very much around, this at the moment is around climate change. And last week we announced that we will become carbon neutral by within the next few weeks. We've got a clear plan of carbon reduction, and then buying properly researched offsets that actually are not just carbon offsets, but are that deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals to meet the rest. And in our carbon calculations, I should say, is we've included what's called our Scope 3 emissions, which are the ones that we can only influence, so we can't eradicate them, but we do take responsibility for those, and we will buy offsets, so that's our staff travel and so on. And I kind of talked on Thursday quite a bit about you know, that nature and society have to be strategically important to business. You know, they can't, we've got to shift from a world in which we look at them as objects of philanthropy or something additional, and actually even shift away from a language of externalities to understanding that actually we're part of one whole system, and that fundamentally business success is built on nature and it's built on thriving societies. So there is no prosperity on a dead planet. There are no jobs on a dead planet. Businesses do not succeed in societies that fail. So that's our kind of starting position and where we see it. And the way that we have developed our thinking around that is very much based on our founding and our hosting of the Natural Capital Coalition, which is I said, you know, was about how do you embed your impact and dependencies on nature into your mainstream decision making, and it's this shift to recognizing dependency that makes it strategic, understanding why it matters, and seeing the connectivity within the world. These are three important pillars to that, and it's also about when dealing with businesses, is casting it in a language that businesses understand. You know, I think I said, you know, you can't kind of rush into a finance director or somebody running a small business who's struggling to think about how am I going to pay the wages at the end of the week. You can't just kind of rush in and say there's a biodiversity crisis, because the response to that will be, well, I'll add that to my list of crises, shall I? It's saying, what are the things that matter to you? And does this thing that we're talking about, nature, society, crisis, do these things help illuminate that? And I think I've had some really fascinating conversations with some of our members who are in small and medium-sized businesses, and over the last 2 years, where they've said, you know, we absolutely finally recognise that, you know, our business continuity insurance has gone up. We had a flood that crucified the business. The air conditioning broke down in the summer. We had to empty the office, and that cost us a fortune. You know, our clouds, the servers in India, the developing our cloud materials all went down because they were all flooded. And these aren't a series of unfortunate accidents. These are connected. And if you view them through the lens of climate change, biodiversity loss, social inequalities, you start to get that sense. And I think businesses are, but it needs to be in a language they understand. So maybe it is not talking about climate change, but talking about flood damage, business continuity insurance, and these sort of things, and helping them see that those things matter. So circling back to what have we been doing with the goals? Well, one of the first things we've done is embed the global goals in our qualification. Now, of course, it's going to take 10 years from somebody who's qualified as a member of ours to become a partner. But those people who are qualifying today will be the leaders of business in 2030. And if you look at the business, the sort of business, the number of businesses that die, as it were, and the businesses that succeed, most of the businesses that are only startups today will be the big businesses of tomorrow. So there is a long-term play here, and that's why we're obviously embedding it into qualification. But there's also the continuing professional development of our members. And so we've done various things. One of the things that I'm very pleased we did was develop a workshop using the global goals and building in gamification to get people to start thinking about this. And we've done this now with about 4,000 people in workshops, and those have been our members, yes, but wider business community. We've done it with universities, with NGOs, in the big four firms. We've done it in Dubai, in Canada, in Colombia, in Southeast Asia, where it absolutely rocked. And it's based around getting people to identify which goal do they identify with. So bringing the personal into the room. And then saying, and depending on where it is, but we did one, I did a workshop with 200 business people in Vietnam. And we said, well, what's Vietnam's goal? So again, it's identifying what is that, but you could do it with the business to say, what do you think your business goal is? And unsurprisingly, most businesses say goal 8, decent work and economic growth. But what we then do is say, get them to play around with the rest of the cards to say, well, which goals do you then depend upon to achieve that success? And which goal and what sort of impacts do you need to have in order to make those outcomes successful, so your outcome is? So effectively what we're doing is getting them to build the system that makes their goal and therefore their business successful. And it's allowing them to find their own stories about their business success rather than us preaching to them. I mean, you can imagine how absolutely desperately dull it would be if you kind of just went through each goal and through each target and through each indicator. And then one of the fascinating pieces is a sort of third round in the workshop we do, which is about disruption. There's always a few cards that people can't build into their mental map of how the goals fit together. And I'd have to say, my experience is mostly with businesses, it's generally ending poverty and hunger. What we do then is we say to them, well, what if those were your goals? What if those were your business goals? And how would you adapt your business to work with them? And we did this at Cranfield Business School, and there were a group of, 50-year-old men like me in suits, all decided to be Tesco, and said, they couldn't do it. And we said, it's a game, play it. And in the end, they said they kind of had reworked Tesco into a workers' cooperative, balancing food and cash crops. And what the point is that if you can't adapt to that disruption, then is your business model a dinosaur? So we've done that. And just to finish, Maureen, one of the things I'm most proud of is that in 2018, the UK government did not do a voluntary progress report to the United Nations. This was very shameful, given that the United Kingdom was one of the big countries that led on setting it up. We're members of the UK's stakeholders for sustainable development, and together we produced a grassroots stakeholder-led progress report that we delivered on the floor of the United Nations in 2018, and we in the TUC actually wrote chapter 8 on decent work and economic prosperity. So that's just to show that actually you know, you in the absence of government intervention, government encouragement, we just led a stakeholder one. And I think that also speaks to you and the whole cooperative movement about you don't have to wait for permission. You can mobilize it from the grassroots up. And I think that's very important in thinking about the global goals. Did I get in time, Maureen?
Did.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes. And we have some, we had some questions. I had one from Rachel. Rachel, what was your question? I'm going to take Rory's. In the curriculum that now includes SDGs, is there any discussion of the potential contribution different types of trading might make? Mutuals, charitable, private.
Yeah, I'm sure that's possible. So what we do is we define our learning outcomes in the qualification. We revisit the qualification about once every 3 years in a major way, and then work with the examiners to make sure that things like sustainability are examined in a direct way. So there may very well be questions like that talk about different trading models, or it might appear in the case study, which is the very final exercise that's done in the qualification. There might be something set there, or they might be done indirectly. There may be a question about energy, which and there would be a certain portion of marks would be allocated if one of the students were to think about green energy. And similarly, it might be if there were a question about trading business models, for example. And there may well be ones that points allocated for questions, for answers that embrace, that think beyond the kind of normal corporate structure.
That would be absolutely wonderful, because it would get the idea of alternative trading into mainstream qualifications. Really brilliant. John's got a question for everybody. Shall I read it out, or do you want to put it?
I'm perfectly happy for you to read it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Do you wish to see the continuation of capitalism or its replacement? And if you wish replacement, is your work advancing that goal? And it's to all of the panelists. Anybody want to answer it?
Yeah, I'll have a go.
Thank you.
I don't want to see capitalism in its current form. So the kind of Anglo-Saxon neoliberal capitalism, I think, is demonstrating that it's failed. I think the experiment of a centrally controlled command economy has been shown not to work. So I think you want some sort of capitalism, but a kind of free, unfettered market, no.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to contribute to that? No. Okay, I think Roger's got a question.
Okay, so can I thank the participant that answered? And of course, the point is that on the 4-quadrant political map, there are 4 options, and the communist centrally managed option and the capitalist options, either managed or unmanaged neoliberalism or neoconservatism, are only 3 of the quadrants. It's up to us to illustrate the fact that there's a 4th quadrant.
Totally agree.
Thank you.
And there's another question from Roger.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks very much. Will, sorry, this is for Will. Really interesting report on what Greenwich Leisure is doing. My understanding of SROI reports, and this seems to be kind of based on a similar set of principles, is that quite often the devil's in the detail of the assumptions that are made, And I'm sort of interested in what are the assumptions made about dead weight. In other words, what would have happened anyway if people were not using GLL? In other words, what's the added monetized value of using GLL, and whether I can understand the Experian data, but are you kind of modeling that a proportion of people might have used another club or as an alternative to GLL?
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, so we haven't done the latter, to be honest. No, I mean, in terms of the dead weight, I mean, the main thing we were concerned about with this when we started working on it was that we wanted a tool that was almost going to be used in a live environment, and so that we could demonstrate what we were doing over time. So I suppose the simple answer to what we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to measure the year-on-year impact and the month-on-month impact, and to be able to manage it in a way so that we could be agile with our decision making. So, you know, if we're going down the wrong route in terms of putting on the wrong activities for the wrong groups and we're not being successful, then we need to change tack. So for us, it was very much about not so much working with Experian, Hallam and 4Global around, factoring in specific dead weights. It was more around being able to use it in kind of a real-time environment and to be able to look at the change over time and to look at the difference that GLL was. I mean, we even introduced, although it sounds, slightly corny, we even introduced league tables, which was very useful for sort of galvanizing the local teams into action. Once they could see where they were on the social value impact league table, then it fired up the local community staff to sort of get out there and start, going after those groups. So we found that was a really useful way of kind of, I suppose, evidencing GLL's change over time.
We have another question, which is from Fides, which is, sorry to be devil's advocate, I've experienced performance indicators not enhancing performance, but merely enhancing people's ability to meet or to juggle the indicators, following the letter, not the spirit. So how do you prevent this? So if I could put that to all the panelists, please. Yeah, Daphne?
Yes, well, I think one way to make sure it really makes a difference is if the co-ops actually try to bring some of this into their strategic plans, and then they're, I guess to some extent almost like forced to do something about it, because if it's in the plan and they have to report on it, then, that might help. But, that being said, of course, they're going to be selective. They're probably just going to pick those that are maybe the low-hanging fruit. But even that's better than nothing. It's a start. So I think you might have to have modest expectations starting off.
Thank you.
There's also the tyranny of KPIs, isn't there? That they could end up being answers to questions that you didn't know you wanted to ask, or didn't actually even want to. And I think that's one of the things that we found with the goals, is that the targets and indicators, don't forget, are those worked out by governments for government's purposes, and are not necessarily collectively exhaustive of the outcome you're trying to achieve. So there's huge scope for additionality. And one of the things that we've found is that whilst the vision of the goals and those 17 outcomes is very compelling for businesses, or can be, sometimes those targets and indicators are meaningless to them. So that you could, if you then force businesses down that route, they start to become a compliance exercise rather than a genuine embedding it into the business operation exercise. So one of the things that a question I would put out there always with the goals is the extent to which you want to see the targets and indicators there, but from your business perspective, what additionality is there that you can create that actually makes a more comprehensive produces a more comprehensive answer to the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to, I would just add to that and say that, yeah, very much GLL in terms of they're very much at the heart of our corporate plan. And that corporate plan hinges around those 4 pillars that I mentioned in my presentation. And you could argue in some ways, my department, the business intelligence department, we're kind of the almost unbiased sort of overseers of all this. And I think what's quite useful from our perspective is that we provide the evidence behind some of that. So in some ways, we're sort of, to an extent, controlling the single version of the truth. So you don't get people cherry picking in our organisation and putting a spin on something that it isn't. So we've sort of got it into quite a good place, I think, and that involves a lot of stakeholder. That involves me working with a lot of the key stakeholders on the development of those KPIs within the corporate plan and 4 pillars. I think that helps really well.
Great, thank you. There's another question for you, Will, which is from David, and it's how has COVID impacted the business, which we spoke about.
Yeah, I mean massively. I mean, it's been widely documented in the media. I mean, the leisure sector's been hit pretty hard. I mean, the only thing I would say on it now is that we're lobbying hard with the government, because quite clearly being fit and healthy and active both mentally and physically is key in the fight against the pandemic. So certainly through a lot of the work that our government, our trade bodies and the key guys that operate our sector, we think we're starting to make some positive noise. And the social value impact piece is interesting, because that's now being used to help lobby the government for funding for our sector. And to be quite blank, looking at we reopened on the 25th of July, and not surprisingly, our footfall's nowhere near where it was pre-COVID, like most sectors. So we just can't see how our sector is going to survive beyond the end of the year if there isn't some intervention. So yes, it's been hit hard, but we're hoping that we're going to make progress with the government on this over the next month or 2.
Oh, that's scary.
It really is horrible. Yeah, thank you very much. We have another question for Daphne. Are there any links between the SDG work and the SORP that we talked about on Thursday?
Not this particular SORP, because this SORP that we're working on Thursday is looking strictly at the presentation of the financial statements. That's really only part A of our SORP. We're actually going to be, looking at the non-financial reporting as well. So that would be our next step. But, we, as an organization, CRC is already, working on developing these cooperative performance indicators. So globally, we're calling them cooperative performance indicators. Some of them will reflect the 7 principles, and some will reflect SDGs. And there could be situations where you could get a 2-for-1. They'll represent both.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? I've been picking up questions from the chat, but if people just put their hands up, I can ask them.
Ian Hewitt, yeah, has got his hand up. Yeah.
I think Nick Matthews maybe before me, but
Go on, Ian. I'll catch you after.
Okay, thanks. In terms of data modelling and stuff, and I'm a bit concerned about that, and the ICA are too, according to Co-op News today, because we're living in a world where data modelling, data profiling, behaviour modelling is the essence of, the businesses that are making all the money. So either surveillance capitalism and artificial intelligence, where is the boundary on this sort of stuff? And how do we assert, a cooperative advantage? I think that the big consumer co-op sees no need to communicate with members, because it can data model them in such a detailed form. It knows their behaviour, it knows what they think, or at least it thinks it does. So we're living in this world where we've become redundant as human beings, and where how is it that we can flag that? And on another one, another critical bit really, is I read a trade union research article on an extraction business in the Congo, which had implemented all the, you know, human rights and good production. It had done that by having a huge, great computer which generated all the paperwork that meant that it was now a socially acceptable mine. And actually the conditions in the mine hadn't changed at all. But this computer was generating a huge revenue by, you know, self-certifying and satisfying all the requirements. So, you know, isn't technology wonderful? But how do we assert ourselves as human beings in this world?
Any comments to reply? I might try.
I'd just say to agree with that. You know, and the need for ethics in AI and data modeling is absolutely paramount. And well, I would say this, wouldn't I? That's why I think where there's a really big role for the professional bodies that like ours take that common interest or common good duty very seriously, and the ethics of our members very seriously, because you're right that not only do those data models can those data models be self-fulfilling prophecies, they can also and do drive and reinforce bias.
Thank you very much. And Nick, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was around the. I've greatly enjoyed these three presentations. I think they're quite challenging. We've struggled for years and years to come up with an intelligent set of cooperative performance indicators that can actually show how good a cooperative is. So I was very interested in all of these presentations. I think the thing that I would ask is. I think there's a very complicated question about externalities which has been raised, in the fact that in a limited liability company, you know, it's very tax efficient and profit seeking efficiency to externalize as much of the shit that you produce, and whatever form that shit takes, as you possibly can. And I'm just wondering if we might be accidentally, by imposing these kind of performance indicators on cooperatives, that we're going to make them even more uncompetitive unless there's a bigger regulatory framework in the economy that forces and encourages businesses to be more, particularly ecologically, but obviously also, you know, safer and all the rest of it. Because it seems to me that if we adopt all this stuff and internalise things that other businesses externalise, we're going to be even more uncompetitive than we are now.
Any comments on that? I've got.
Well, I think it. You know that there is the point. You're absolutely right about having a free ride at others' expense. When we were setting up the coalition, we did a study with people like Coca-Cola and Shell and others. Big companies, and just said, you know, why do you even care about nature? You know, because to your point, you know, the company is a legal fiction that allows you to put onto society and the environment all the costs you don't want to bear yourself. And one of the really compelling responses that we got back, which was overwhelming, was, well, we ran out of food, fibre, and fresh water within about 10 years. So those businesses are kind of really leading on this. Absolutely get that the externalizing of pollutants and so on, and the asset stripping of supply chains and of nature is it is that the ability to get away with that has just telescoped in, you know, and is very immediate. So a company you may not have heard of, you may have heard of Olam, who actually control about 30% of the world's cocoa. Huge commodities producer. They work very hard to get it right. But you know, one of the things that they have to do in California is ship in bees to pollinate the almond groves, because there are no pollinators there. So if you like, they have a profit and loss hit because they've got to pay for the bees, but there's also a reduction in product in yields. But there's also, from their perspective, a balance sheet item, because they are going to invest in restoring habitat such that they get pollinators and therefore that free ecosystem service. And I suppose the only thing is that you know, that is the way the tide is going, and regulation is becoming much heavier. If you look at how the Bank of England is regulating the banks around climate change, which pass on to businesses that regulation through costs, price signals, and lending decisions, investment decisions, then I think that the tide is on that way, and the opportunity for the cooperative movement is to show the leadership, and therefore to win the public heart and mind.
Thank you very much. I've got another question from David. It's in the chat. Daphne, could you elaborate on the top SDGs that you highlighted in the research?
Well, the three top ones of the list, the full list of SDGs, we asked our participants to rank their three top ones. But of course, we're going to be trying to find ways, of course, to make sure we provide them with examples of how they could measure on all 17 SDGs, as well as the cooperative principles. So we're going to give them a full package to choose from. So as I mentioned, we have this massive spreadsheet with over 400 different combinations of different indicators, but we're trying to pare that down to make life a little easier for the practitioners who are going to be going through. So we're going to certainly expand beyond their top three, but we thought it'd be interesting to see what they would say for their top three, but we want to measure on all of the SDGs.
Thank you. And Elizabeth, do you want to put your question? Shall I read it? Okay. To everyone, whether are co-ops, and why are they then better placed to spearhead accountability for sustainability, and what can they teach the wider business sector in this respect? I think that's to actually everybody. Daphne, thank you.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, certainly with co-ops where they're not focused exclusively on profit maximization, theoretically, they should, you know, have an interest in SDGs and hopefully, you know, direct some of their funds that they have available to work on the SDGs to the extent they can. You know, we'd like to think that cooperatives would be more diligent on SDGs than, you know, commercial for-profit enterprises. But that's just maybe a lofty notion that I have of cooperatives. Maybe it's naive.
Do you think, and again, this is for everybody, do you think that by aligning the co-op principles with the SDGs, co-ops will be able to show more clearly to other businesses that the cooperative values are ones that maybe everybody should be embracing? Mutuality and care? Or would that work?
I think it would. I mean, you know, it demonstrates leadership in responding to, you know, it's somewhat arrogant to turn around and say that and to ignore the Sustainable Development Goals, isn't it? Because this is a clear statement of what the world wants, and aligning your goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, I think shows leadership, and the fact that you're beholden to your members, I guess, is right. Means that you are more likely to be able to think about purpose than in a world of stock markets where you're completely disintermediated from your shareholders. And actually, is shareholder activism really that decisive?
With shareholder activism, you could think about members as well.
Yeah, but members are much closer to their cooperative, aren't they? Whereas shareholders, I mean, how many of us know where our pension funds are invested? How many of us have ever exercised our rights to vote? And that's not a criticism. It's just we're so disintermediated in the investment market with different drivers of behaviour in the kind of investment chain. Whereas with a cooperative, you're much closer to there's a much closer link between the members and the asset, if you like, isn't there?
I think it should be.
Mm. And that mutuality is a sort of a principle that is kind of mediate or moderates the kind of the profit maximization or the aggressive capitalism.
Vides, can I put your comment to everybody, which is that are the SDGs only really relevant for large organisations? Organisations maybe also where you're trying to get that connection back? It's to everybody.
No, absolutely not. I think that there's a huge potential in grassroots and in small collections of people, whether they be businesses or community organisations or groups of individuals, to work on the Sustainable Development Goals. And some of the most inspiring and successful stuff is very much grassroots, bottom up.
Rory.
I just want to, I hope, Maureen, you don't mind me showing something that from the work that we've been doing.
No, not at all. No.
One of the questions that keeps arising is, what value do co-ops produce for sustainable development? And this is a table from a paper that Maureen, myself, and a colleague called David Wren has submitted to a journal in Japan. And it ties in with the integrated reporting breakdown of the 6 forms of capital, although we reverse the order in our work to put natural capital at the top, working down to financial at the bottom. And it enabled us to sort of look at how the Sustainable Development Goals map against the IIRC breakdown, which makes it a little bit more digestible. And then we took a co-op called Resonate in Ireland. Apart from our own reading of that case for a European project, we then got 5 students to do a deconstruction of the wealth creation and use of Resonate Co-op. And it's quite interesting to get a broad picture of the value creation that's created across all the different forms of wealth. And there might be something in using that framework, the IRC framework, in order to get at the detail of the value creation in co-ops. So I'll just leave that for a couple of minutes in case anybody wants to say anything, and then I'll stop sharing the screen. Yeah. I'll happily share the paper. In fact, I could probably put a link to the paper. I think it's in the university repository. Yeah. Or ResearchGate, possibly.
John's just made the point there that all the SDGs are consequential on income inequality, which was the top one that it came out top in Daphne's research. But what do other people think about that?
I think some value is not related to monetary. I mean, if you think of Durkheim's work from the past, sociological work, what he found was that people's sense of self-being could still be quite high in relatively poor communities if there's an egalitarian culture, and that people are more at risk actually when they had substantial rises in their income. Their rates of suicide go up when people get dislocated from their communities through suddenly getting a promotion or suddenly getting an influx of money. So people can be at risk from big changes in their income. I'm not disagreeing with the human spirit, the spirit level, by the way. I think if you can raise incomes across society, then you can generate a lot of good social outcomes too.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, Rory, that suicide rates are just one of the two groups of metrics which have no explicable basis. I think that they're to do with two factors at work. And Gillian's just commented about waiting for everyone to become equal isn't going to happen. And the proposal that I made in the presentation was this idea of the second chamber making a recommendation on an annual basis about the level of equality that they thought was appropriate, and for the elected chamber to respond appropriately. The fact is that if you look at the chemistry of wealth creation, that diagram that I showed from the spirit level, figure 1.1, amply well demonstrates that capitalism simply generates pollution. It's an illness, system illness. And unless you get rid of the fake living form called interest-bearing debt, which is the thing that's driving the whole of the planet to destruction, unless you withdraw that social permission to charge, receive and pay interest on debt, then we are basically on the road to Armageddon, toast. And Ted Turner and Bill Gates' approach, which is to kill us all off, is not the way forward. Incidentally, Chair, I noticed that Richard Bickle has got a blue hand up.
I'm so sorry. I didn't see it, Richard. Please put your question.
So it's a bit of a, I'm not sure it's a specific question. I've just been thinking, so Nick suggested in his question that being good corporate citizens makes us less competitive as businesses trading in a market. And I'm just not convinced that's true, partly because I don't think that the price mechanism captures all aspects of value. And I think as organisations that exist to generate value for members, it's a very narrow approach. If you know, I've heard of co-ops where large co-ops are representative democracy, where the management have said to the board, leave us to get on with making the money and you can do your cooperative things when we've done it. Well, I think that's a total missing of the point, because I think what you do as a co-op should deliver intrinsic value for members collectively as well as individually. And that may well mean that you do things that other capital-based organisations would find not to be profit maximising or not to be the rational thing to do, but you do them because they provide access to a service or some kind of collective benefits, which could include a sense of belonging that your members value, and in as much as there is a monetary aspect to, are prepared to pay for. I think that doesn't necessarily, that member value thing doesn't necessarily map onto the kind of SDG framework, but I do think that most people want to live in a community in which everyone is included and in which people are treated fairly. And I think the rise of fair trade goods, for example, where people choose to pay a little bit more, illustrates that people are prepared to do something that might be economically irrational for them personally, because they feel there is a benefit to someone who they'll never meet somewhere very far away. So I think this sort of assumption about the sort of rational, selfish individual simply doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The one point I'd make in response to Richard about co-op members being closer to businesses and shareholders, I certainly think that can be true. I don't think it always is. But what I do think is that where you have co-ops that are big enough to have some form of representative democracy, co-op boards are definitely a lot closer to their businesses than PLC boards or public sector and Quango boards are. And this has brought home to me, I serve on the board of Central England Cooperative, £800 million retail society. And I've had conversations with more than one senior auditor with a big four accountancy firm who has commented how intimately those of us sitting around the boardroom table actually know the business that we're running. You know, we're all non-executives, but their observation was that we have a much more detailed understanding of what our organisation does and what the impacts of that are on the people who work in it and the members that we serve than you would find in a generic PLC with people who pocket a lot of money to be non-executive directors who are in one boardroom one day and another boardroom the next, and are more concerned about having a nice lunch and banking the fees at the end of the month.
Thank you very much. David, could I ask you to make it really quick so that we can give the panelists a minute each to wrap up?
Yeah, it's one of the top priority policies for Welsh Government at the moment is establishing a cooperative bank. And we had last Friday our annual general meeting, and we were looking at the proposed value and mission statement. And there was quite a detailed argument going on between myself and a colleague in a very good-natured way about what should be the top priority. Should it be member engagement, and I'm summarising there, or should it be a commitment to sustainable development? And the two are inextricably linked, and I'm just wondering if Daphne could provide any short comments there about learnings that we might have from other cooperative banks in other parts of the world.
Daphne?
Okay, just wondering if it's okay for me to respond now. Yes, well, certainly when you look at this type of performance information in Canada, I would point to two that provide very comprehensive reports and certainly appear to have really integrated the sustainability notions into their business practices. So one is Van City Credit Union, a very large credit union in Canada, and also the Co-operators, which is a large insurance cooperative in Canada. And I would say these two really embody, not just through reports, but through their actual business practices, you know, the cooperative difference. They reflect the 7 principles, and certainly the insurance company is certainly doing its best to address its role in climate change and various SDG as well.
Great, thank you very much. Could I ask Will and then Richard if you got a few, just a way to wrap up and to say actually thank you so much to all 3 panelists. I think it's been a really diverse discussion. Thank you very much. So Will, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Maureen. I mean, nothing really to add from my perspective. I mean, just to really thank you for inviting me to present and share GLL's story around social value impact. And it's just, sometimes it's just nice to sit and listen to other people's views and opinions. And I've certainly learned quite a bit from taking part in this session. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I love GLL. I'm Richard.
Well, really just to echo Will, the 2 days I've been here, I've learned huge amounts, and I'm very flattered that you invited me to come and speak. But I think just, you know, that I think we are at a moment where there is a great public desire for a different type of world, and the challenge is going to be turning that ambition into a reality. And I think, you know, I certainly think that the cooperative movement has a massive role to play because it offers a different way of looking at the world.
Thank you very much. And Daphne, have you anything to add on the end?
Well, I think overall, if cooperatives embrace, you know, reporting on both the 7 principles of cooperatives and the SDGs, I think this gives them an opportunity to really demonstrate their cooperative difference. And through my own discussions with various CEOs and CFOs, you know, in some of the larger cooperatives in Canada and the US that I've spoken with, I think they've kind of, I wouldn't say lost their way, but they've kind of drifted away from really focusing on their cooperative difference. And, you know, I'm hoping that through these types of initiatives, it will actually, you know, get them focused on what they really are, which is a cooperative. And it was interesting. I had an appointment, I met with one CEO, and he said to me, I just looked up the cooperative principles before you came. So he's the CEO and didn't know what the 7 principles were, and he wasn't new on the job. So, you know, I think this hopefully will heighten awareness, and it would be a useful tool to demonstrate how, you know, the cooperative form of business structure really does differ from commercial enterprises. So that's my grand hope. Whether or not it'll be achieved, I don't know.
Thank you very much. I think that is a really good sort of way to end this discussion. But Rory, you might want to sort of wrap up for the whole
Yeah,